everyone ay nakapag-lunch na. Sige, okay. This is to inform everyone na we are now streaming live on Facebook. So hello din po, good afternoon sa aming mga sa mga manonood from and magpa-participate from Facebook. So kung pwede po, i-share niyo po para po mas marami pa po ang matuto ngayon sa lecture nating ngayong hapon. So alright, sige. I would like to turn over now to Karen, my colleague sa center for the next for our program proper. Karen, you are still muted.
So good afternoon po sa lahat. Maraming salamat po sa pagpapaunlak sa aming paanyaya para sa webinar na ito on ending the rape culture. So reminders lang po siguro reminders muna dun sa mga paki-off na lang po yung mic natin kung hindi po tayo magsasalita para mapakinggan po natin yung yung mga nagsasalita po. Tapos kung may mga questions po kayo, na lang po later sa ating chat box para masagot po natin later sa ating forum. Tapos, so simulan na po natin. Tinatawagan ko po para sa opening remarks si Director Renante po ng Director ng HRCMO po.
Banji, si Gina.
Maraming salamat, Karen. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Maayong hapon sa ating tanan. Good afternoon. There is an article titled, "Rape Culture is Not a Myth. It's Real and it's..."
Hello, Doc. Nawala po kayo, Doc.
Sorry. Okay. I start from the very beginning. Dagang salamat, Karen. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Maayong hapon sa atong tanan. Good afternoon. There is an article titled, "Rape Culture is Not a Myth. It's Real and It's Dangerous," written by Amanda Taub from books.com, December 15, 2014. It describes rape culture in the following manner. There is a culture in which awareness of it has entered the mainstream. A culture in which sexual violence is treated as the norm and victims are blamed for their assaults. It is not about sexual violence itself, but about cultural norms and institutions that protect rapists, promote impunity, shame victims, and demand that women make unreasonable sacrifices to avoid sexual assault. It is called rape culture, which is more than sexual assault. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, titled "Ending the Rape Culture." This is part of the month-long celebration of the National Women's Month. This topic is rather serious, but very much welcome since it needs to be seriously addressed. Rape involves not only physical, but also psychological or mental violence. It impacts on the physical, social, interpersonal, and financial aspects of the survivor. Research indicates that the most common immediate impact of an act of rape is fear. Consider the following. 1. Intense fear and anxiety are the primary response following rape, as cited in PITRAC of 2002 by Peterson, Olasov, and Fox. Second, ongoing fear can be related to reminders of the attack, such as medical examination or legal proceedings. I'm going to share my experience as a medical legal officer. This is really true. If I can avoid this, I would not ask the patient or the victim on this one, because this is the most dreaded question. What had happened? Can you narrate? We're going to ask the patient, can you narrate what happened during the incident? Can you recount the incident? And that's the dreaded thing, that's a dreaded question for the victim or the survivor. If I can't, If I can help it, I would like, right? So if I can help asking that, I'm not going to ask that because that's one of the fear that the victim would not want to experience, because I can see really the pain and the anguish the patient has been suffering by answering that, by narrating again the incidents. And then third is the fear of contracting human immunodeficiency virus or the sexually transmitted infections or the STIs, and of becoming pregnant as a result of rape. These are the two most common questions asked of us by our patients during the medical examination. As a national human rights institution and as a gender ombud, the CSR is well within its mandates to earnestly address rape culture and victim blaming, and effectively advocates and promotes respect for women's rights, thus making perpetrators accountable for their actions. I commend the Center for Gender Equality and Women's Human Rights for organizing this webinar, in particular the team headed by Attorney Twyla, Karen, MJ, Russell, and Leah for the hard work. Thank you for the hard work. I would like also to express my thanks to Attorney Clara Rita Padilla, the Executive Director of Engender Rights, for accepting our invite as a resource person. She will discuss, among others, the methods devised by the perpetrators and how to strengthen evidence gathering and prosecution techniques. For the support and guidance on our undertakings, our Focal Commissioner in Gender and Women's Concerns, Commissioner Karen Gomez Dompit, maraming salamat po. And to our participants for their readiness and the willingness to learn and to implement the learnings. To our focal persons from the central and from the regional offices, maraming salamat po, daghang salamat. Again, welcome and stay healthy. Karen, nakamute po kayo.
Karen, you're still
Ayun. Salamat po, Doc Basas po.
Okay.
Ayan. So, para sa ating inspirational message, tinatawagan ko po ang ating ever supportive and ever masipag na ating Focal Commissioner on Women, si Com Karen Gomez Dumpi.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
loud and clear po.
Good afternoon to everyone, and allow me to just give you some points about today's lecture, a learning session on ending rape culture. No? UN Women defines rape culture as a social environment that allows sexual violence to be normalized and justified. It is pervasive as it is entrenched in our way of life. Hindi natin alam minsan the way we think, treat, and relate to each other distinct to his or her gender. While cultural, social, and political and economic contexts could be different between and among societies, rape culture is deeply rooted in patriarchal beliefs and unequal power relations. It's also reinforced and maintained by cultural norms and institutions that protect the perpetrators or perpetuators and shame victims and normalize impunity. So rape culture manifests in an environment in which rape is prevalent and in which sexual violence against women is justified and excused in all settings. So, may it be private, in public, or online, offline. It's more apparent in media, obviously, where gendered violence in movies and televisions are highlighted, no? Portrayal of manhood, for instance, as dominant or sexually aggressive, and womanhood as submissive and sexually passive are put forward. Also, yung popular culture na tinatawag, no? Where, for instance, beliefs that blames victims na, she asked for it. Kasi naman, yung suot niya, di ba? Sasabihin pa na ganon, trivializes the sexual assault boys will be boys, or sexually explicit jokes na maraming tayong nakakarinig niyan, ano? And then tolerance of sexual harassment. They become a way of life, unfortunately, no? In a vacuum, it is perpetuated through the use of misogynistic language, no? And the objectification of women's bodies and the glamorization of sexual violence, and in doing so creating a society that disdains women's rights and safety. So that's from the Marshall Education Center, when they talk about the rape culture and sexual assault. So apparently rape culture cultivates an environment in which rape is common, victims are silenced, and rapists are not punished. So it treats rape as a problem to be solved through improving the behavior of potential rape victims, mostly women, rather than changing the behavior of potential rapists, which is mostly men. Sabi nga natin no, there was a joke na in this certain area of the Philippines, marami daw nare-rape doon kasi maraming magaganda daw doon, di ba? Pero ang sinabi naman ng iba, maraming nare-rape doon sa lugar na yun kasi maraming rapist doon. So we have to change our perspectives. So again, yung treating rape as a problem, it takes many forms. A classic example of problematizing this is, of course, yung blaming a rape victim for attracting the rapist's attention, as I've said, no, of wearing revealing clothes such as skimpy shorts or dress or mababa yung neckline, or being a flirt or open about her feelings. Another example is that couched on personal responsibility of staying safe by telling potential victims, for instance, na huwag kang uminom sa parties, o di kaya huwag kang makipagbarkada sa lalaki, o di kaya huwag dumaan sa madilim at makikipot na lugar, which places the burden of preventing rape on potential victims. Now, let me just clarify this. Of course, we need to have safe seeking behavior. Importante po yan. Pero kung ganito lang palagi and it's one-sided, then there's something wrong with that, because we have to address, let's see, all the stakeholders in that particular situation. So it's not enough to just say this. We're not saying it's totally wrong. What we are saying is, yes, we do need to have safe seeking behavior, but at the same time, we need to address the whole situation and not just pin the responsibility or pin the blame or pin the actions na dapat i-reform from the other side or from just one side of the situation, no? From one actor. So it perpetuates unwillingness and or inability to punish the perpetrators of rape and sexual assault. So police officers, prosecutors, and juries often cling to the stereotypical image of real rape. Real rape in the context of rape culture is pegged as that of a complaining victim has to prove that she has good character and has physically resisted the attack to the point of exhaustion in order to establish that the rape is against her will, and that a circumstance that does not fit the stereotypical pattern is perceived as unsubstantiated or as an unsubstantiated case and could not progress in court. The impunity, however, is not just contained in the legal system. Institutions such as cultural communities, churches, schools, and other settings fail to address the same. No? And as magnified by culture and social pressure, victims remain silent due to patterns of blaming and ostracizing. The rape culture thus makes rape incredibly common. It hinders us from really knowing how common it is, given the stigma, victim blaming, fear of reprisals, and the fact that reporting results to nothing which of course in the end silence victims. No? Apart from underreporting, this has more pernicious consequences beyond rape. It polices victims' lives, sabi nga nila, no? And constrains their freedom and limits their opportunities. It also demands unreasonable sacrifices to stay safe and conform with cultural expectations, taxing their own social and economic opportunities and overall social or overall progress. So it's therefore high time to bring the issue into the mainstream. Discuss what it means, how it works, where it comes from, why awareness of it is crucial, and how it drives injustices that go well beyond rape itself, given the nature of our work as gender ombud. So again, this is a learning session for all of us, and we're very fortunate to have been joined this afternoon by a prominent expert, no, si Attorney Claire. Happy Women's Month to you. And of course, she's well known in the field of human rights and law. And she will enlighten us on this topic, on how we can change this culture of rape culture na tinatawag and victim blaming culture that we have. So maraming salamat, and again, kudos to the Gender Equality and Women's Human Rights Center for this initiative. We need to continue the conversation because we know that while culture is not static, napakahirap baguhin ang kultura. Kung merong if there is an environment that actually encourages this, no, because of misogynist remarks, because of all these things, from, as we can see, from the highest levels of authority, no? So we must be able to ensure that we go against this kind of thinking, no? While it is ingrained in culture, again, as I've said, we have to choose to challenge that kind of culture that does not respect the human rights of especially women, no, in this particular situation. Maraming salamat po sa inyo.
Maraming salamat po, Kom Karen. So, para hindi na rin po natin patagalin, so introduce ko po ang ating resource speaker for today. So, our resource speaker for today is Attorney Clara Rita or Attorney Claire Padilla. She is the founder and executive director of Engender Rights. She is an internationally known lawyer who has worked in the Philippines and in New York, defending women's and LGBTI persons' rights for over 26 years. She has expertise in the fields of gender, gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health rights, and diverse sexual orientation and gender identities. She drafted the very first version of the Reproductive Health Care Bill in 2001, passed into law in 2012, the ordinance creating the Quezon City Protection Center for victim survivors of gender-based violence and abuse, and she co-drafted the Quezon City Gender Fair Ordinance prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and providing affirmative acts passed in 2014. She was also one of the drafters of the DOHAO 2016-0041 on prevention and management of abortion complication. Her proposed language for draft bills were adopted into laws, including the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act and the expanded anti-trafficking law. She won several Supreme Court and bank cases, including the 2010 landmark case of Angladlad versus Comelec, the constitutionality of the RH law, the labor doctrine case, Pioneer Texturizing Corporation versus NLRC, and Lourdes de Jesus. She is a widely published feminist lawyer and human rights activist with her articles and submissions published in the Philippines and internationally. She co-wrote the Outright Action International and Engender Rights publication entitled Protocol to Address Domestic Violence and Family Violence Experienced by Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Intersex persons in the Philippines. In recognition of her work on SOGI, she has received an award from the Quezon City Pride Council and the Purple Feather from the Order of St. Adriel. So let us welcome Attorney Clara Rita Padilla.
Okay, good afternoon,
Good
everyone.
afternoon po.
It's good that we're doing this session, and I came afterwards. The background um, given by Dr. Basas and Commissioner Karen. So, Karen, I'll start. Okay, but before I start with the first part actually is a question and answer part, and I'll ask the participants to type in their answers with the questions that I'll be posing. But before then, um, I'd like to state also that my discussion will not just tackle on what it will actually tackle on a lot of things such as how to, in terms of, for example, what Karen mentioned earlier about effective prosecution and all. Because to me personally, ending rape culture is partly one, tackling um, negative stigma, negative beliefs, patriarchy, sexism, but at the same time, um, effective prosecution. So I'll discuss that. So we'll start with the question and answer portion. Minutes. Okay. So I'll ask the participants to type in their answers. So please type in Q1, whether your answer is yes, no, or unsure. Okay. So a woman complainant said she tried to prevent the rape by stalling, pleading, expressing a desire to go home, constantly moving away from the perpetrator, and keeping her thighs tightly closed. Does she have enough evidence to prove she resisted the rape? So if your answer is yes, please type in Q1 yes, Q1 no, or unsure. Okay. So may I see the answers? I am only seeing just a few. Okay. So in this case, okay, yung complainant, di ba, pinapatagal niya, nandun na siya sa actual situation, pinapatagal niya, sinasabi niya, wag gawin yan sa kanya, uwi na lang siya, etc. And then moving away from the perpetrator. Okay, so I see some answers now. Okay, next question. In a rape case, should a complainant's past sexual conduct, opinion thereof, or of her reputation be admitted as evidence? So, yung bang pag-present sa past sexual conduct niya, opinion tungkol doon, dapat ba yun i-admit as evidence? Yes, no, or unsure? Q2. Okay, thank you. Question number 3. Within a week after a woman rape survivor was raped, she related the incident to her best friend. Her best friend testified about what was related to her and the demeanor of the rape survivor. Is the testimony of her best friend admissible in evidence? So please type in your answers whether it is yes, no, or unsure. Okay, thank you. And then question number 4. Should a wife who was raped by her husband file a complaint for marital rape against her husband? So Q4, who says yes, no, or unsure? Okay. The others, please type in your answers. Okay. Question number 5. Okay. Should the medical health provider provide emergency contraceptive pills or ECPs or the morning after pill to prevent unwanted pregnancy resulting from rape? So Q5, please type in your answers whether it's yes, no, or unsure. Okay. Okay, later I'll discuss my own answers. Okay. Okay, question number 6. Should abortion be allowed for women victims of rape? Q6, what is your answer? Is it yes? Is it no? Is it unsure? Okay. The others, please type in your answers for Q6. Thank you. Okay. Next question. Q7. Can a doctor refuse to treat a woman suffering from abortion complications? Please type in your answers, yes, no, or unsure for Q7. Okay, thank you. And then question number 8. Should a public school allow a lesbian to wear pants in school? Q8. Is it a yes for you? Is it a no? Or is it unsure? Q8. Okay. Okay. This is my last question, and you can type in your answers. Q9. What is the age of minors who can be placed in the Bahay Pag-asa for committing rape? If you know the answers. Okay, some are answering. Okay, a little more. We'll see a little more answers. Okay, thank you. So the answer is actually, this one actually talks about those without discernment. So those without discernment, as of now, the law is that above 12 and up to 15, they would still be committed to the Bahay Pag-asa. Okay, but remember, I'd also like to point out that we have been pushing for raising the age of sexual consent, meaning below 16, everything, any sex with a minor who is below 16, which is up to 15, would be considered rape. And why? Because we have been seeing that a lot of the cases are actually sexual assaults of young girls age 15 and below. Okay, so there are bills pending in Congress on this. And there are proposed exceptions also. For example, if they were already in a relationship prior to reaching the age of 16 and others. But otherwise, what we're saying is that we have really been seeing a lot of sexual assault cases for 15 and below, including those that are committed by, for example, 18 years old and above, but also in their early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, even in their 30s or even older. Okay, so I'll go back to the first question and give you my response. Okay, so here, this is actually based on several cases that I've assisted, where we found um, that there are certain people, like for example, in the cases, particularly women, who have different forms of resistance. And the resistance, and I'm borrowing the Women's Crisis Center, where they use the term women's form of resistance. Because here you would see that there are people who, in a particular case, in two cases actually, they were asked to go to a hotel thinking that there was a party. When they arrived there, they found out that there's no party. And in one case, there was one perpetrator. In the second case, there were several perpetrators. Okay, so when it was apparent that that the ill intent was actually to commit sexual assault, the woman tried to stall, pinapatagal niya, tried to plead, saying, please do not do this to me, I want to go home, etc. And then constantly moving away from the perpetrator. And then at some point when she was overpowered, she kept her thighs tightly closed. Okay, so hindi niya binubuka yung thighs niya. Okay, so what we're saying is that we should all remember that in this kind of a case, of course, whenever, of course, there's lack of consent, there's already rape, and the resistance can be varied forms. Several could be like this. In fact, many could be just this. So we're saying that this is enough evidence of rape. Okay. So I'd like to tell you about one case, and I will mention her name because she came out in public as a rape survivor, and that is Karen Vertido. In her case, she was afraid that the perpetrator had a gun with him. So she became catatonic. Hindi na siya makagalaw, na-shock siya. And that's basically it. Okay. So here is what we're saying. Unfortunately, she lost the regional trial court case. And what we're saying is that, and the judge then was even a woman. Okay. So it's not necessarily True that if the judge is a woman, she will resolve in favor of the complainant rape survivor. Okay. So here, what we're saying is that there is lack of um, um, failure to recognize that there is resistance, and there are different forms of um, demeanor in terms of a rape survivor. And later, I'll discuss that further. Okay. So for question number 2, this is what is called the rape shield. Okay. So in rape shield, internationally, what is said is that any kind of complainant's past sexual conduct, whether she has had several uh, ex-boyfriends or has had sex in the past with many other people, that should not be admitted as evidence. Okay. And no kind of, for example, even a woman engaged in transactional sex should be able to say no to sex, right? And when she is forced, that would be rape. Okay. So let me ask a question to the participants. Would you prefer English or would you prefer Filipino? Because anyone who says Filipino, I will discuss in Filipino. Please. Thank you. Okay. So here, um, except here in the Philippines, what we still have is RA 8505. And RA 8505, unfortunately, still has a provision there which provides for an exception where the judge finds that um, uh, such kind of evidence, past sexual conduct or opinion thereof, is relevant. What we're saying is that this kind of evidence is never relevant and should not be admitted in court. So we still need to revise the law, but even without such revision, the judges should not admit such kinds of evidence, okay? Because otherwise it will be, again, blaming the survivor, right? And that should not be the case. That is uh, part of our discussion in ending rape culture. Okay, so here, could you admit the people who would want to join in? Okay, so here, what we're saying is that there are many times when the rape survivor would be in an incident where um, she would be the only one there, and the perpetrator would be the only one there, or only one survivor but several perpetrators, or one or two survivors in a group of um, perpetrators. And the perpetrators mostly are still men. I'll discuss that further later. Okay. So here, um, of course, the testimony of the woman is very important, but we want to bolster the evidence, and that's part of effective prosecution. Okay. So when we want to bolster the evidence, that we could present, of course, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, the police officer, any social worker, but also we want to present other people to whom she related the incident when she was still suffering from trauma. Okay, so this is what you call the exception to the hearsay rule, and this is what you call the res gestae evidence. Okay, so when I was in law school, I did not. There was no book that would tackle this, and I only learned about this um, when I was already prosecuting cases. I was reading books and books just to be able to prosecute effectively. Okay. So here, and I'd like to go back. I have also seen um, cases filed by police officers, unfortunately, where um, they do not get the affidavits of the people to whom, for example, the best friend, the mother, the sister, the classmate, they fail to uh, um, submit such evidence. Okay, so what we're saying is that at the precinct, they should be able to collect all such testimonies and write them in affidavits and submit them before the prosecutor or before the court, okay? And before the court. Okay, so here, um, this slide is about uh, women being able to say no to sex, whether or not they are married or whether they are in a uh, girlfriend boyfriend relationship, for example, okay, or any kind of diverse relationship what we're saying is that they should be able to say no to sex. And whenever they are forced, that would be rape. And in the case of a married woman, that would be marital rape. Okay. Under the law, we should still change the law because as of now, um, it still mentions that there is the forgiveness clause, and we should do away with any kind of forgiveness clause because we all know that that is discriminatory. And I have had a lot of cases where, from the very start, the first time they went out on a date, there was already sexual assault that happened. And unfortunately, for example, in one case, the family thought that it was consensual. They were married in after a week after the sexual assault. Okay, and that was a very violent relationship. And I have interviewed a lot of women with those kinds of relationships. So what we're saying is that any kind of forgiveness is still part of the whole process of gender-based violence and power being exerted by the husband. Okay. Okay. So here, what we're trying to raise awareness on is the emergency contraceptive pills, okay, or the morning after pill. So these pills are very important. They can prevent pregnancy resulting from rape. Um, they are not abortifacients. That's why internationally they are known as contraceptives, right? And the main mechanism of action, if you're talking about the pills, would be to delay the pregnancy, delay the ovulation rather. Okay, so um, when the ovulation is delayed, okay, there would be no egg released at the time that the sperm is there. Okay, there would be no meeting of the sperm and egg, hopefully, and it's very, very effective. Okay, almost 99% effective. So, but the sooner it's taken, the better. It's only effective up to 5 days. Okay, so that's very important. Okay, so the next, the next is here. So the question is kindly mute the other participants, please. Okay, so here what we're talking about is um, the issue of abortion for rape survivors, and not just for rape survivors, but in the meantime, for example, for rape survivors, do you know that out of all the women who induced abortion, there was research in the Philippines which showed that there are about 13% or one out of every 8 women who induce abortion are actually rape survivors. So that many people who are rape survivors um, excuse me, induce abortion. Okay. So, but what we're saying is that there are many reasons why a woman would um, try to terminate the pregnancy or stop the pregnancy, interrupt the pregnancy. And here, what we're saying is that it is her right. Otherwise, she could die from the complications from unsafe abortion, for example, if she's not able to access safe abortion services. Okay, so it's a life and death issue already. Okay, and if she is forced to carry the pregnancy to term, there are a lot of people with um, health risks, including adolescents, who will die uh, um, because they are forced to carry the pregnancy to term. Because adolescent pregnancy is actually a very high risk pregnancy and childbirth. Okay, so they can die from the mere childbirth and pregnancy alone. Okay, so imagine she is a rape survivor and she will die um, because she had no access to safe abortion, merely because of the maternal health risks. Okay, so here what we're saying is that the doctor cannot refuse any kind of um, a woman suffering from abortion complications. And as what I've said, this can be a rape survivor, this can be a battered woman, and there are battered women also who suffer intrauterine fetal demise because they were kicked by the husband or punched by the husband in the stomach. And I know of several cases of this. Okay, so and regardless of the reason, the doctor should provide such services. Okay. Okay, so I showed this slide because um, it is a lesbians, right, or a transgenders boys, right, for example, to wear pants in school, and I have had cases where, for example, the um, the transgender boy was made to wear the curtain as a skirt and parade in school. Okay, so here you would see that, of course, that's child abuse. And what we're saying is that such kinds of discriminatory acts can lead to other discriminatory acts. For example, we have research where we have seen in, for example, the Bangsamoro region, where there are some fathers who would ask friends to rape their daughters or rape their transgender boy sons. Okay, so what we're saying is that here, um, because we do not have laws on anti-discrimination based on SOGI or comprehensive discrimination based on intersectionalities of discrimination, even including SOGI, you have people who think that it is not normal to have a diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression when it is very much normal. Okay. Okay. So, here I'm showing the emergency contraceptive regimen. It's very important to have the specifically dedicated emergency contraceptives. We used to have one registered in the Philippines, and it's called Postinor. However, it was delisted because the company pulled out. Okay, so unfortunately, no pharmaceutical company has tried to re-enlist such kinds of um, pills, but it is very, very effective, more effective than the combined oral contraceptive. Okay, so we all know that there are combined oral contraceptives, for example, the ones with estrogen and progestin. The specifically dedicated ones only have progestin. Okay, now these are very important, as I've mentioned, to prevent pregnancy resulting from rape. So um, we also have ulipristal acetate, and it's registered to shrink the myoma. And it has been shown um, that just this year that it's more effective on the later days, on the third to fifth days. Okay, so uh, for the combined oral contraceptives, what we usually have in the market would be the low dose ones. Okay, so for example, Trust, 4 pills plus meclizine, for example, Bonamine. Um, and then after 12 hours, this is within the 5 days, right? From the rape incident. After 12 hours, take another 4 pills of Trust together with Bonamine contra hilo. Okay. So the reason why you need to take Bonamine is because the pill has estrogen and it will make one dizzy and it can even make someone vomit. Okay. Okay, so IUDs can also be used. Um, Before, the evidence was only on copper-bearing IUDs, but now, 2021, we now have levonorgestrel IUDs, which I was already toying on even before the research of the scientists came out, because obviously it can be used to um, as an emergency contraceptive. Okay. Okay, so here we'd like to take into context that, of course, gender-based violence, this would include rape and other types of gender-based violence. It's committed against women because they are women and because of women as a gender. So this is gender discrimination. It also happens to LGBTQIA people because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, or SOGI. So the issue of being feminine and masculine becomes an issue for others when it should not be the case, right? Um, and that's why abuses would happen, and that's why we are discussing this now to end such gender-based violence. Okay, so it can happen across socioeconomic classes, and you have basic disrespect for men's rights, which should not be happening, and disrespect for one's soji, which should not be happening. Okay. Okay. So here I'd like to talk about the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the committee that monitors the implementation of the Women's Convention, or the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, and the obligation to address gender-based violence with due diligence. Okay, so one, of course, is for the state to refrain from engaging in gender-based violence. And when I talk about refrain, here is when we can talk about ways where, for example, the police the army would not engage, for example, in armed conflict, uh, because whenever there is armed conflict, you always have heightened gender-based violence, including sexual assaults. Okay, so internationally, it's also known that even the UN safekeeping officers, they are actually committing rapes as well. There's a lot of evidence on that. Okay, so here, um, for example, in the case of Typhoon Haiyan before Yolanda, okay, right after it struck, I was in a large meeting with PNP, WCPC, DSWD, etc., UN agencies. Um, and I was saying that if you're going to send police officers um, to the evacuation camps, I told them that please send police women. Okay, and this is to avoid any kind of sexual harassment, rape that would be happening in the evacuation centers. Okay, so and what was good then was that they actually deployed police women. Okay, so but what we're seeing now, for example, in COVID responses, is that at the checkpoints, and especially during the ECQ, we saw that the checkpoints, many, if not most, then were actually men um, at the checkpoints. And as you know, there are reports of trafficking, there are reports of sexual assault, sexual harassment. And what I'm saying is that this could have been stopped or prevented if women were at the checkpoints. Of course, um, that is one prevention. And of course, not all women are non-perpetrators, but most of the perpetrators in the past have always been mostly men. Okay. Okay. So exercise in due diligence would mean preventing. Preventing would of course mean um, raising awareness on gender-based violence, implementing the comprehensive sexuality education, which is still not being implemented properly and effectively in all schools. Um, when we say prevention, we also talk about proper prosecution, effective prosecution, because any kind of effective prosecution will actually prevent, for example, rape from happening from to the same woman by the same perpetrator, or by the same perpetrator by the same perpetrator to other women. Okay, so and or by other perpetrators to other women. Okay, so that's why prevention in terms of effective prosecution, effective investigation, and punishment. These are all very important. Okay, so that's why we're also talking about medical assistance, because as you will see later, these are all very important in addressing the impact of gender-based violence. Okay. Okay, so in terms of eliminating gender-based violence, we are saying that perpetrators of gender-based violence, rapists, must be held accountable, um, so as to prevent them from further committing rapes and not being able to commit rapes, for example, with impunity. When we say impunity, committing rape without being investigated and being punished at all. Okay, and that's difficult. And as you will see, the impact of such kinds of impunity. Okay, so we are saying we should be able to stop impunity, effectively prevent and prosecute, stop gender-based violence, and have a zero tolerance of gender-based violence. Okay, and that this is not a private matter. Okay, so our hashtags: stop rape culture, and hashtag end victim blaming, hashtag rapists belong in jail. If you can um, post later on your own hashtags, that would be very helpful. Okay, so um, as Karen mentioned earlier, rape is so prevalent, and we must do our share to stop the rape culture, and victim blaming, advocate for respect for women's rights, LGBTI people's rights, discuss schemes and means used by the rape perpetrators, and later we'll discuss that. Medical interventions, we already mentioned emergency contraception, um, and also HIV transmission. This can be prevented through post-exposure prophylaxis. I have a slide on that. Okay, so we want to strengthen complaints. That's why we had the question and answer earlier, and an evidence gathering as well, um, to effectively put rapists in jail. Okay. So we're saying that society must recognize that no means no, and this should be taught. Like when we have a 3-year-old with us already, onwards, or even at 2 years old, maybe. Um, um, so what we're saying is that hashtag no means no, hashtag sexual assault of a drunk woman is rape. I've had so many cases where um, perpetrators took advantage of a drunk woman. Okay, and of course, we're saying that um, it is not the fault of the woman for drinking. She may have some kind of problem, and I know a lot of people, which should not be the case, right? That if you're depressed, you should not be drinking, of course. But depression is such that it can happen to anyone, right? And there are many reasons why a person will drink, maybe to celebrate, and many people will have different effects, right, to their bodies. And unfortunately, the only ones who should be blamed would be the perpetrators. Okay, no one else. Okay, so um, next is that we're saying that rape is a crime of violence and torture. uh, I mean, right? Who would do such a thing? Only those with, and later I'll discuss that, those with psychiatric and psychological disorders. Okay. So we already mentioned the gender-based violence, that it can place a woman in a life-threatening situation. That's why some women do not physically uh, use force to repel, for example, the perpetrator, because they're afraid of dying. Who wants to die anyway, right? Um, so here is a situation where we even have acquittals in court. We have prosecutors who dismiss cases. We have service providers who are not able to provide the proper services, effective, immediate services, which are all very important. Okay, so next. Okay, so we're saying, of course, that rape is a violation of human rights, the right to life, health, security of person, um, and it violates the right against gender-based violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, trafficking, and the health impacts. We'll discuss that later as well. Um, it violates the right against torture and even forced pregnancy, and even the freedom from disability, because some people may really experience extreme trauma, psychological trauma, which is also a disability, physical trauma, pain, and all. Okay, so apart from the other rights, we are also mentioning right to privacy and bodily autonomy. And because we also have a lot of marital rapes that's happening, we are saying that um, we need really the right to divorce, okay? Because these people, uh, we should not make it more difficult for them to end their marriages. And that's why we should all support the right to divorce, because I have known cases where they have been in the abusive marriages for so long, like 15, 20, 25 years. And only on the 25th year, when the children are all grown up, that is the only time that they will file for um, um, to end the marriage. Okay. So here we're saying, of course, the right to contraceptives, emergency contraceptives, whether adolescents, should be there. Okay. And of course, as I mentioned, safe and legal abortion. Okay. So in the issue of safe and legal abortion, one question I'd like to pose is that if men needed safe abortion, I'm sure that we would not have the restrictive policies we have now, okay, which we actually adopted from the old Spanish penal code. But you know that in Spain, abortion is actually safe and legal, along with many other predominantly Catholic countries. Okay, okay. So we are saying that we should end victim blaming, as mentioned by Commissioner Karen earlier. No woman asks to be raped. Um, she does not. Uh, she is not to be blamed if she is dressed in a way that others would think that she's dressed provocatively. In other countries, um, you would notice that it's very common to have plunging necklines. Here in the Philippines, it's not too common, especially for those who are older, like in my age. But for younger women, you would see that it's very common. And we're not saying, of course, um, that they are asking for it. No, that is definitely not the case. It's only the perpetrator who should be blamed. Okay. So, and here I'd always like to post that the cases that we've handled, you have a 6-year-old girl who was raped, and it's not because she asked for it. It's not because of the story she was mentioning. It's not because she was dressing provocatively. Okay, so that is only the excuse of the perpetrator and their lawyers who are being paid a lot of money. Okay, so here what we're saying is that there are unfortunately some Supreme Court cases which say that if a woman is young, innocent, naive, a barrier that she should be believed. What we're saying is that any woman, even if she's not young, not innocent, not naive, not a barrier, she should be believed. Okay, we should give credence to her rape complaint because it is likely to be true, and there are Supreme Court cases with a line that is saying that when a woman says she is raped, she is likely saying that this is true. Okay, and it's to me, I've handled many cases. I cannot count them anymore. I would say that all of them were all telling the truth. Okay, so anyone can be fearful. And here is the example that I made earlier. Again, the case of Karen Bertido. She was in her early 40s then. She was an executive director of the Davao Chamber of Commerce then, and she was raped by the president of the Davao Chamber of Commerce, who was much older than her, and of course her boss, and who was very powerful and rich in Davao then. Okay, so again, only the perpetrator should be blamed and hashtag end victim blaming. Okay, so in filing for a complaint, many people might come up to you, uh, and many people uh, they may seem to be um, dejected. Okay, they might not want to prosecute. Okay, so here is a very important part that you can do as the friend, as the ate, as the kuya, as the younger person, whatever. It's important for you to urge the survivor that she is standing up for her rights, that um, the manner in which she is standing up for her rights, complaining to the barangay, complaining to the police, filing her case with the prosecutor's office, appearing in all the hearings before the prosecutor, before the court, um, having herself examined by the medical legal officer, going to the psychologist, psychiatrist for um, um, examination, counseling, and all, the social worker, speaking to the lawyer, and all. This will all put us that she is making a stand, and the stand is that she wants to put a stop to the human rights violation happening to her. She is making the perpetrator accountable. Hopefully, she wins the case. So that's why we're doing all of these discussions because we want uh, the rape cases to stop, right? But whenever they happen, we want the complainants to win. Okay, so that's why we also talk about these discussions with judges, justices, even. Okay, so and it's very important for them to know, the complainant, that if she reports immediately, the perpetrator can be arrested, and that is what is called the hot pursuit. And um, when that happens, when detained, there is no bail, right? Um, of course, there will be an inquest and all. There will be a resolution, and when found that there's probable cause, the case will reach in court, and there's no bail at all. Okay, so even when a warrant of arrest is issued, once arrested, there's no bail. And that's what is important. Okay, do you know that there are moves? There used to be moves to remove to provide bail, and I stood up in the forum and said, we are already losing the cases, and here you are wanting to place bail in the rape cases. And I was saying, this is unbelievable. Okay, so here, prevailing problems. Okay, so we have high conviction of rapes when the woman is killed, of course, because clearly she did not consent. However, we have dismissals when the rape complaints when they are alive, and that's unfortunate. It's good that she was alive, right? And yet she would still lose the case. So here you see the victim blaming, that when the woman goes to perpetrator, it is mistakenly considered by prosecutors, by judges, by justices as consent. The only consent was going to a certain place, but not being sexually assaulted. Okay, so only the perpetrator should be blamed. Okay, so um, the lack of consent is very important for all of us to appreciate. Coercive circumstances can be many things. Um, Being locked up in a hotel, trying to leave the hotel, but you cannot leave the hotel in many cases. Trick to go to a house, the house of the perpetrator, only to find out that there's no party and all, actual cases that are happening. Um, and of course, even the effect of alcohol. Um, and then, what I also mentioned earlier, the threat of being beaten up or being killed, it's likened to a hold-up situation, right? So they are so disempowered, they are overcome by fear, and we should be able to recognize those as coercive circumstances. Okay, okay. So we'd also like to bust the rape myths. Okay, so the reason why we're saying myths is because some these are false, right? And what we're saying is that we should bust them. Okay, so we should eliminate victim blaming, and rather we should believe the victim survivor or the survivor. There are different types of women's resistance. Failure to shout, offer tenacious resistance does not make it voluntary, right? Um, there is no standard behavioral response for rape survivors. People react differently to different stimuli, right? Some people might even laugh when they are presented in court, and that's a nervous laughter. I used to do that a lot when I was younger. Um, there's no logical behavior. And you would still see that even in 2018 Supreme Court cases when there is sort of saying that why is there delay and that the delay affects the credibility. That is not the case, right? We know that delay in any kind of reporting should not affect credibility. And there are many reasons why people will delay. What if the perpetrator is the uncle, the father, the boss, the supervisor, the mayor, etc. I've had cases where the perpetrators were the mayor, the congressperson, the ex-congressperson, etc. So there would be delay definitely because um, these are people who can threaten their safety even after the rape is committed, right? So um, even even not knowing where to go, right? So that's why we are discussing this. So people will know what to do, where to go, where to file complaints. And so rape also can happen anywhere at any time, right? So there are also no standard lacerations in a 2018 Supreme Court case. Um, from one um, research, the ponente actually did an obiter dictum. It was not part of the issue of the case. It was not even part of the research, but the court there, it's in the case where it says that if it's a 3 o'clock laceration, that's forced. If it's 6 o'clock, it's not forced. There's no such thing. That is not, it's not supported by scientific evidence, okay, throughout the world. Okay, so we're saying also that rape complaints are not easily fabricated, um, in that we should believe the woman when she says she was raped. Okay, and there are Supreme Court cases saying this. Okay, so I mentioned Karen Vertido's case when it was dismissed after 8 years of prosecution by the Davao court. Um, she went to the CEDAW committee, basically um, 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 discussing the issue of rape here in the Philippines, the law, the problems of prosecution, etc. And here, what the CEDAW committee experts said in their recommendations is basically one, for the Philippines to review the definition of rape and to place lack of consent at its center. So that's why I wrote a draft bill for the Philippine Commission on Women, basically amending the anti-rape law. Okay, so but that bill is sleeping in Congress when it should not be sleeping in Congress. Okay, so basically what we're saying, what the CEDAW committee said is that the lack of consent should be the center, right? And that um, instead of requiring force, threat, intimidation, etc., place there, that the second to the last bullet point, we should rather accept coercive circumstances, which could be many other examples. No, there doesn't need to be any kind of force, right? But the situation is so coercive, and I'll discuss that later as well. Okay, and here, what the CEDAW committee said is that the sexual assault um, should be defined as to require, uh, and this is putting the burden of proof on the accused, where, for example, the accused is the one supposed to show that it's unequivocal, walang kaduda-duda, that the woman uh, voluntarily agreed to the sexual act. Okay, so without proving that there's no doubt at all, uh, walang kaduda-duda. Other than that, it would be rape still. Okay, okay. So in a lot of discussions, for example, on trainings on sexual harassment, I actually discussed as a standard operating procedure um, to ask, especially in 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 dating situations, right? To ask the person, "Can I kiss you?" etc. Right? Because that should be the standard. Okay, nothing should be coerced. Okay, and you cannot say that it is, and even when the person does not speak up, expressly says no, if it's in a coercive circumstance, if it's the boss who was asking, "Can I kiss you?" Probably the other person might not say no, but she's still coerced. Okay. Okay. So here, what I'm saying is that, and I know that some of our service providers are here. Thank you very much. Um, uh, Here, what we're saying is that it is very important to provide gender responsive services, because it's a make or break situation that the victim, survivor, the survivor will decide to file the complaint. Okay, so if the survivor comes to you, okay, asks for help for a medical legal, okay, for a psychologist, okay, for a social worker, okay, or does not is not able to say expressly that she needs these kinds of services, but you know that this is what happened. It is your duty to refer to the medical legal, your duty to refer to the psychologist, psychiatrist, your duty to refer to the social worker. And even in the pandemic, you can call the psychologist, psychiatrist, you can call the social worker, because otherwise, if they leave, if the woman leaves, okay, or the woman and her child leaves, okay, you know that there's a high possibility that she might not prosecute the case anymore, because the very first persons they thought would help them were not able to help them. Okay, so it's a make or break situation. The barangay people, um, if they say something sexist, the same with the police officers, it's the same thing. They might leave, and even in battered women cases, this would be the case. And we're saying there should be gender responsive services. Okay, of course, it's very important for anyone in an abusive relationship to be able to urge them to leave the abusive relationship and tell them the pros and cons. Okay, the con, of course, is they can die from the abusive relationship. Okay, so um, and there are, of course, cases of not just marital rapes, but also murder, parricide, uh, suicide. Okay, so the husband would rape the wife, the husband would kill the wife, kill the children, and then commit suicide. That has happened in the Philippines, and uh, the evidence on that is not even being investigated, and that should be investigated. Okay, the stats on that. Okay, so we should be able to make the referral for the remedies, right? Referral for shelter, for example. For example, children might not speak up, and I've seen cases such as those. Try to talk to them for 30 minutes. You cannot get anything, for example. Okay, but it's very important to get the proper social worker, etc., to be able to talk to them, because they are skilled in this. Maybe they are afraid, especially if the person they are talking to is the police officer wearing a police uniform. They are afraid if the person they're talking to is a lawyer like myself, who sometimes might have a frown on my face or something, right? So that's why it's very important to refer them to people who are trained in this. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about statistics. Okay. So statistics, we have one woman rape every 75 minutes, and I'm using the statistics in 2018 because they didn't actually, the PNP didn't actually come out with stats in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, but I think I'm not mistaken. In 2020, they came out with stats, but there was already the COVID then. Okay. But the stats that came out initially was that they were saying, oh, but there's a decrease in cases. Of course, there would have been a decrease in cases only in reporting. Why? Because people did not want to report because they didn't even want to go to the barangay because of their fear of COVID. And we noticed this even with the protection center. And even the Quezon City Protection Center, where I report as a lawyer, as a consultant, um, we were closed from uh, mid-March to end of May. Okay, so and we saw when we spoke to the women, it was apparent that they were afraid of reporting because of COVID. Okay, so so anyway, we still have that many one woman rape every 75 minutes. Okay, with adult deaf women, they found with the deaf groups and those who are supporting them. They found, and this was raised with the RPB case, a deaf case of a woman who was raped who is deaf. Okay. Um, and she was not provided with a hearing sign language interpreters. There is one adult deaf woman raped with every 3 adult deaf women. Okay, that many. Okay, and with deaf children, they found that with every 3 deaf children, there are 2 deaf children who are survivors of sexual abuse. Okay, so and as regards the age 15 to 49, you have the latest still, the National Demographic and Health Survey, where you would see that they are citing that there's 5% of age 15 to 49 who are uh, who experience sexual violence with their current or most recent husband or partner. Okay, if you translate that into rates, you have one woman in every 20 women who are sexually experiencing sexual violence. That many. Okay, in the incest cases, we have seen even at the protection center, some are belatedly reporting only when they reach their mid 20s, only to find out that their sister was also raped by their father or their grandfather or something. Okay, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. Do you know that whenever I have speaking engagements, maybe a few hours after or several days later or weeks later, people would message me and say that uh, they are survivors of rape and all. Okay, um, asking about what to do, etc. Okay, so and then now I'd also like to mention about being proactive in terms of, for example, rape survivors, hiring rape survivors uh, uh, as employees or abused women or persons with disabilities. Why? Because we have found that many of the survivors, when they do not have financial capability, sometimes even when they have a free lawyer, for example, the prosecutor, they're not able to go to court. What? Because they have no funds even to pay for transportation. Okay. Okay. So the support is very important. Okay, so I'd like to talk about the impact of rapes, and this would be adolescent pregnancies. Okay, so and this is a risky pregnancy, as I mentioned. So you have 2 times risk of deaths in adolescents who are pregnant. Okay, from pregnancy and childbirth, and if they're 15 years old and below, higher risk. Okay, if they have infants who are born, they have 3 times risk of dying. Okay, and um, here we are saying this is also an issue of child rights. Okay, so Dr. Emma Lianto, I'm citing her work in the Teen Mom program of PGH, and they have found that um, because they are dealing with teen moms, they are now saying, they have been saying that always check for sexual abuse for 15 years old and below, because they have found that. Okay? So, and that's why they have made it a standard, for example, for their teen moms, and as a prevention, not to have for the middle adolescents, not to have relationships with those who are 3 years older than them. For example, the 14, 15, not to have relationships with those who are 17, 18, 19, and older, obviously, okay? Because there is marked difference in terms of development, emotional development, physical development, and all, etc. Okay, so um, we also have experience where we have sexual abuse survivors who are prone to being sexually active. Why? This can be one as a result of low self-esteem, and sometimes they are even the ones who are blaming themselves. When, as I've said, there's no one to blame except the perpetrator. So here, I'd like to take a look at what's happening now. For example, 2020. In 2020, for the girls aged 10 to 14, if you have a daughter aged 10 to 14, a sister aged 10 to 14, for example, do you know that last year, and even until 2021, we already had about 40 to 50 adolescent girls aged 10 years old to 14 years old who give birth every week. Okay, so this is why, in many of these cases, of course, would be because of sexual assault. And that's why, as we've mentioned, we should address gender-based violence. That's why we should support the bills raising the age of sexual consent to 16, as recommended by the CEDAW committee, which we have been pushing for the longest time as well. And as I've said, access to emergency contraceptives and even safe abortion, okay, including for adolescents. Okay, so we already talked about unwanted pregnancy. Some The impact of rape would also be because they became pregnant. Some of their parents would uh, drive them out of their homes. Okay, so because the parents um, thought that they were engaging in consensual sex. Okay, and they didn't find out that it was not consensual. For example, they even throw them out of their homes. Okay, and that's when they end up in transactional sex trafficking and all. Some of them became HIV positive, and we have interviewed a lot of these people, out of school youth, etc., in our the Gender Rights HIV project. Okay, and of course we know the disruption, okay, and the impact, the social impact, the disruption of studies, low educational attainment, lack of job skills, career options, lack of financial capability, and the cycle of poverty. Okay. Okay. Next. Okay. So now we'll talk about motive means opportunity. So when we prosecute cases, and also, of course, when we discuss awareness raising, it's not just in the prosecution that we should talk about this, because there are people with ill motives, and we know that. Okay. Um, we should be teaching children, for example, young women, that there are people really out there who are bad people and who will take advantage of certain situations. Okay, so for example, and motive can be shown in if they were sexual harassers in the past, if they were sexually harassing the same woman or other women. Okay, they're already making sexual advances. Okay, um, they have been trying to invite for dates and they have been always turned down, but they still keep on inviting for dates. Okay. Oh, wait, just a minute. And that would be sexual harassment already. Okay. Um, they would stalk. Okay. They would have sexist words and acts. Okay. Um, for example, and then other acts as well. For example, they are into a lot of fights. Okay. Uh, and later I'll discuss the next slide, which I pressed earlier mistakenly, about disorders. Okay. So the means used could be using drugs, using alcohol, and all. And then opportunity. Opportunity could be also because, and the means could also be because they are the boss or something. Okay. The opportunity could be because they said that there was a party, there was a unofficial function, and then there was none, for example. Okay. So that would be um, that would be the situation, circumstance, the chance to commit the crime. Okay, so it's very important for us to teach this to young people. Okay, okay, okay. So and then here is the recognizing abusive behavior. Okay, so it's very important, and then I have been discussing this in the last few years because it's just clear from the cases that we've handled and from the evidence from the psychologists, psychiatrists, that there are personality disorders. So one, they could be in a narcissistic person, one person who sees that they are perfect with no mistakes at all, they're above other people, they can make no mistakes, etc., and that other people are below them, and that could be a woman who is around them. Okay, and usually a narcissistic person can also be an antisocial person, where they are already an antisocial is also a sociopath, psychopath, where they're already committing crimes. For example, they are sexual harassers, they are rapists, they are batterers, they are mass shooters. And then this has been seen in a lot of cases where in mass shootings in other countries, they have seen that the mass shooter, upon investigation, they found out that he was also a batterer, he was also a rapist. Several cases, okay? So these are clear examples of personality disorders, okay? So of course, if they are narcissistic, antisocial, they are stalking, sexually harassers, they are sexist, they are patriarchal, okay? They may also have been, they may have learned violence as a learned behavior. They may have been in dysfunctional families, but that's not an excuse, right? But these are people who never get any kind of counseling because they think they're perfect. They do not seek counseling, okay? So they are dangerous because they do not recognize that there is something, they have a disorder, okay? So that's why they have this what I call batterer mentality, okay? Okay, so we'd also like to show, and this is the research of UPPGH, um, they saw that in the case of Dr. Marisa de Guzman, uh, many of the perpetrators are tambays, pakalat-kalat sa labas, for example. The father, stepfathers, teacher, coach, priest, co-worker, supervisor, because obviously the survivor is accessible to the perpetrator. The perpetrators take advantage, which should not be the case, right? Okay. Okay. So in terms of, and I'm glad that Commissioner Karen mentioned about um, safe seeking behavior, because in our cases, uh, we have already seen patterns of schemes, okay, being used by perpetrators. So that's why we should talk about the schemes, okay, and that's why we're also saying that basic respect is very important, right? Um, and basic empowerment is very important. And when I say empowerment, that includes being assertive. Being assertive actually means saying no, dismissing obnoxious people at the onset, okay? But if you're in the coercive circumstance, that's already a problem, okay? Or in a place um, where your security is compromised, that is a problem, regardless of how assertive you are. If you're faced with a gun, that's a problem already, okay? So here, of course, there was one case, several cases where the client I assisted, the very first pro bono case that I handled, um, the woman was grabbed along the street and she had an umbrella. She was able to hit the man with the umbrella and run away. Okay, but she was already the man already grabbed her breast, and also that the case we filed eventually. Then it's an old case. My very first case was acts of lasciviousness. Okay, so here I'm saying that the use of an umbrella could be useful as well. And now, given the COVID, a use of an alcohol, perhaps spraying the alcohol on a clear perpetrator would also be useful here. But as I've said, these are situations where you are able to do that and you have the uh, clear uh, thinking to be able to do that. But what if you're already compromised in the sense where you were drugged, uh, you were drinking, okay? So that is where it makes it um, different and difficult already. Okay. Okay. So teaching women and girls the schemes, and later we have slides on that. Being wary of suspicious men who show motive in the past, and as I've said, these suspicious men might have sexually harassed other women before, or have stalked her in the past. So this is where I'm talking about assertiveness, where you use the law. Use the law where you file a restraining order, for example. Okay, so if it's a safe spaces violation, you can file a restraining order. Even if it's not in a safe space violation, you can use the civil procedure and file for a restraining order. I have done that even prior to the anti-violence law. Okay, okay. So in terms of, okay, so I had here for the first bullet, being educated versus low level of education. Why? Because in the National Demographic and Health Survey, as early as 2008, they already found that, and this is what they found: the likelihood of experiencing sexual violence decreases with increasing educational attainment and household wealth status. Why? Put it a different way of saying, lack of access to education, lack of empowerment is a risk factor. Why? Because the predators would not want to commit rapes with someone who is well educated. Why? Because the well educated person would know what to do in many cases, but in not all of the cases, if they're aware. But if they're not aware, it's still a problem, right? So here, this is just a general statistic that they found. Okay, so it doesn't apply to all of the cases where, as I said, it can happen. For example, in the case of Karen Vertido. Okay, so here, what we're saying is that the perpetrators would not want to commit uh, a crime when they know that the woman would be able to get a lawyer, pay for a lawyer, okay, that the woman would know what to do, where to go, what to find. Okay, so that's where we're saying empowerment is important. Okay, okay, okay. So here, teaching children and I'm borrowing the slide of um, Dr. Marisa de Guzman of UPPGH uh, Women's Desk. Okay, so here she's saying that teach children that parts of the body that are covered by the bathing suit, the bikini, the bra, are off limits to other people. I have known cases, would you know, uh, that a 14-year-old was saying that she did not know that it was not normal for the father to finger her in her vagina. Okay, so that is a problem because our society does not talk about sex and does not talk about improper touches. Okay, and the incest. Okay, so here we're saying that we should talk about this to be able to prevent it from happening. Okay, so for example, teaching children and young adults not to have text mates or FB friends with adult men. Okay, because they employ schemes. Okay, in one particular case at the Quezon City Protection Center, we know of adult men showing Japanese pornographic cartoons to the young children. Okay, and they would use this as a ploy to entice them to engage in sexual acts. Okay, so the children should know about this. Okay, so and then there's also the fact that um, there's a continuum of sexual violence. It can happen from touching different parts of the body. It can start from giving out of candies, asking the child by a neighbor, for example, to go to the playground or something, and then she is raped and killed. Okay, we have known a lot of those cases. Okay, so um, we also know that in many of the cases, if it's incest rape, um, when she is raped, for example, by the uncle would say, I will kill you, I will kill your sisters, your brothers, your mother. Okay. So here what we're saying, or if it's the father who's committing it, so here what we're saying is that children should know about this, the continuum, okay, the schemes, and unfortunately, if it happens, they should know that they should report immediately because um, if the incest continues, they are more at risk even of being killed at some point. Okay, and the trauma is so extreme, and we know of such cases. Okay, the prolonged kind of incest, or even just one. Um, um, these are all very traumatic. Okay, okay. So okay, and then we also know that in some gangs now we have done a lot of interviews, uh, that the gangs in communities, they would use sex as the initiation. Of course, that would be sexual coercion. Okay, so here are the schemes. Okay, and these are all based on many cases that we've handled. So, for example, being tricked by the man to enter the hotel room. It can be in the guise of their work, a party, for example. Some are even from UN agencies. I know some cases. Um, and then some are tricked to enter into the house. For example, they will say that I will introduce you to my parents. They give them an iced tea. Okay, and it turns out that that is the ploy being used by the young man. Okay, and he did it to several youngsters just this COVID. Okay, so um, another would be sleeping at the motel, saying that they are so drunk that the male driver would just like to sleep in the motel. And of course, if there was no ill intent, that would be fine. But there was ill intent from the very beginning. Okay, and then others would offer free lodging. Several cases. It turns out the first few nights are fine, but it ends up um, he had ill intent. Okay, so and then being accompanied to a hotel room, and then the man barged in. Okay, so what I'm saying is that because there was ill motive from the very start, and because these are men with already disorders, these are the problems. Okay, so being accompanied home by these men with who are sexist and who have no respect for women, they would rape them, whether as a group, inside the tricycle, near the home, etc. Okay. So, and then being coerced to drink with a man or a group of men, even they when they have said that they did not want to drink. For example, this can be in a hospital premise, and it's only when we prosecuted the case that the male doctors who were in the higher hierarchy um, stopped doing it because we filed for criminal complaint. We filed rape cases, administrative cases before the Professional Regulation Commission. That's the only time that the that the that they're bringing to the dungeon stopped. Okay, so these would be the residents, the consultants, raping the interns who are already doctors. Okay, so um, cases where a young woman um, would know a friend, have a friend, um, thinking, and then she's asked to go inside the particular camp. Inside the camp, they were drinking. She said she wanted to go home, for example. Um, she wasn't allowed to go home, and you would see there the coercion already. And then thinking that they would allow her to go home if she just drinks one. She drank one but fell asleep, maybe because it was spiked. Okay? And that's when they started taking turns. Okay, so these are, of course, the ill motives of the people who were scheming. Okay, so as I mentioned, spiking alcoholic drinks, using drugs, sexual assault of drug women, several cases. The principal against the teacher, several thick books of cases where the principals in public schools were the one sexually harassing and committing sexual assault of teachers. The same with judges versus court staff. Several books thick of cases of these cases. Okay, and then judges in beauty contests, they actually prey on the beauty contestants. Okay, so it's also a scheme being used. Okay, so um, and then, of course, militarization, authoritarian regimes. We know of the examples in martial law. I have friends with some of them who were raped during the martial law. and they're traumatized until now. And there were no prosecutions. Okay, and that's the impunity, and that's why we're saying there is really uh, there no society should allow such kinds of authoritarian regimes. Okay, so and also we know that during humanitarian crisis, uh, sex trafficking, etc., rapes, etc., battering would spike, and even with COVID. Okay, um, so that's why we're saying women police officers should be deployed. Date rapes, there are so many. Okay, okay. So here, what I'm saying in terms of safe seeking, remember when we were young, where parents would teach us, don't talk to strangers. In my case, my mother would tell me, don't go with people you don't know. So I didn't go with people I don't know. Okay, so that was the rule. Okay, so now what we're saying is that, for example, even in dating relationships, do a social background investigation, do a background check, for example. There have been some cases where I've handled cases where they were married and she did not know that the man had a previous marriage. So these are basic social investigation. Who would do such a thing, right? So clearly you would see that these are people with ill motives. Okay, so of course we would say that drink with trusted people. But who are the trusted people? And I would say trusted people are those who would not sexually harass others, who have not sexually harassed others, who have not battered other people, right? So these, what I'm saying is that if you can take a look at these kinds of stories, then it might be best to stay away from them, right? And that's what we also tell our clients, to stay away from potentially abusive people. Okay. So, and also, of course, very important, bring your drink with you. Okay. So if you're going to drink, do not place it on the table and leave your drink. Do not do that. Okay. If you forget about your drink, do not drink on the same glass anymore. Okay. Because it could be spiked. Okay. Okay. Better to be safe and sorry as always. Okay. So here's one case I'd like to mention. Just a few more slides. Um, I'd like to mention this case where in Quezon City, a young woman uh, told her mother that, sabi niya, yung kapitbahay natin na tambay, sabi niya, parating tumititig sa akin. Okay? So sabi niya ngayon, sabi ng nanay, sabi niya, baka nag-admire lang sa'yo. Okay? Unfortunately, a week after, the man broke into her house, raped her, and killed her. Okay? So here is one clear example where I'm saying the outcome might have been different if she, with or without her mother, went to the barangay, okay, told the barangay, especially now, saying, this is a violation of the safe spaces. I feel threatened by him, etc., etc. He's leering at me. Tinitingnan ako na para akong hinuhubaran, yung ganyang klase, di ba? Um, um, and especially if he says something sexist and all, right? So what I'm saying is that by doing that, the person would be positively identified, right? And the person may be called, and good if the barangay calls him to the barangay, right? And there could be uh, an investigation, and she can even uh, proceed in prosecuting her case if she wants to, right? Also, who what they're saying also is that perpetrators would not want to commit a crime if they know that they're already positively identified, if they will be made the suspect, right? Anyway, so eventually, he was one of those who was lingering when the Soko was there, and It's good that the Soko brought all of them who were surrounding the house when there was investigation being done, and the DNA evidence matched uh, at the crime scene. Okay, so here what we're also saying is that the Soko, and here is my appeal, that the SOCO should be involved in rape cases even when the survivor is alive. Okay, so the SOCO should not be there just because someone died. Okay, or because someone died. The SOCO should also be there even when the rape survivor is alive. Okay, because there are many the evidence uh, uh, that could be gathered at the crime scene. Okay, okay, and here what I'm saying is that whenever we have acquittals, there are some survivors who lose interest in filing cases. For example, in the case of Nicole, there was another case by a U.S. service personnel, and we finished her draft complaint affidavit, but she said she didn't want to prosecute because she didn't what want what would happen to her with what happened to Nicole. And that was when, remember, after she won the RTC case, Nicole, it was um, appealed, and Lance Corporal Smith was acquitted by 3 women justices, and then her picture was posted in the newspaper. So what we're saying is that this is a violation. The posting of the picture is in violation of RA 8505, right? The Victim Assistance Act. And of course, there are people who do not want to file cases, unfortunately, because of such kinds of um, um, non-compliance with the law, okay, and clear disregard of the woman's right. Okay, so here is one case I'd like to mention. Just a few more. We can extend. Here is a case of 2 children who went to the Quezon City Protection Center, and when they came in, one was 6, the other was 15. Um, I was already thinking that this might be a case of incest, uh, because the guidance counselor who entered, I recognized her as someone who attended one of my talks, one afternoon talk. Okay, so we found out that the 15, when she was 9, the father started raping her, and this continued until she was 15. When she was 13, the father, uh, ah, when she was 13, she had frequent UTI. Okay, when she went to the doctor asked the mother, is your daughter sexually active? Unfortunately, the mother did not know that she was being raped by the father. So they weren't referred uh, to a child protection unit, for example, a protection center. Okay. So for unfortunately, the rapes continued until she was 15. Okay. And her younger sister, who was 6, her father started raping her already. Okay. So here is what we're saying, that the other rapes would have been prevented. The trauma would not have been such that when we were talking to them, we were able to talk to the 6-year-old, but the 15-year-old one, it was very difficult to get to be able to talk to her. Okay, so we needed intensive counseling before she would divulge the whole situation. Okay, so we found out from the 6-year-old. Okay, so um, uh, here is what we're saying also, that it's very important for us to recognize the manifestations of sexual assault. For example, a child who was previously talkative becomes withdrawn, the grades would drop, etc. Okay, and making the proper and effective immediate referral. Okay, so here are just some examples of, as I mentioned, the impact of rape, where you would have those who were raped, became pregnant as a result of the rape, induced abortion, and died. One is a 19-year-old raped by her stepfather, who induced abortion unsafely, died in 2012. And another is a 26-year-old doctor. Imagine, she was raped, became pregnant as a result of the rape. She did not have access to safe abortion still, despite being a doctor, and she died from the complications. Others would try to commit suicide or die from the suicide. Others, one case particularly, one case I always mention is, I spoke to the mother. She was from, anyway, I won't mention the province. Um, I spoke to the police officer and the mother, and the story is like this. The 21-year-old rape victim, I say victim because she dies in the end, she became pregnant as a result of the rape. She had dwarfism condition. Her height was up to the waist of the mother, and usually dwarfism would be 4 feet 10 inches. And anyone who has 4 feet 9 inches and below would have a risky pregnancy. And so after giving birth, the day after, she died. Okay, so these are examples of the impact where they will die because of unsafe abortion, suicide, or carrying the pregnancy to term. So that's why we're saying, if this is your loved one, would you want them to die? They were already raped, and you would want them to die because of clearly lack of access to safe abortion. Obviously, for a lot of people, their answers have been no. They would no. They would not want their loved ones to die, and they would support their um, right to safe abortion. Okay, so the law broadened the definition of rape. Um, it's now classified as a crime against chastity. Do you know that certain groups are making a compendium of revision of the revised penal code, and we found out that they were asking the male professors were asking, so why is it now not a crime against chastity? And we were surprised because obviously it should not be a crime against chastity because as we have mentioned, anyone can be raped regardless of the sexual past, right? And regardless of the opinion. And that's why it's a crime against person, okay? So that's why I talk about this. Otherwise, we will have the same problem even after now, even when the anti-rape law was passed way back in 1997. Okay. So, okay, just a minute. So here, so as of now, it's still forced threat, intimidation, deprived of reason, etc. under 12, but we're trying to raise it up to uh, the age of consent to 16. Okay. So that's why coercive circumstances is very important. Okay. So the complaint should be short. It should quote the language of the survivor. It should quote the clear lack of consent in blow-by-blow account, cite the coercive circumstances, and mention it as discrimination against women. Okay. And then similar acts would be if the perpetrator sexually harassed someone before, uh, raped someone before, battered someone before, or is always into fights, these could all be admitted as evidence. Okay. Okay. So medical legal, of course, as I mentioned, the hot pursuit, the inquest, uh, and then um, released for further investigation if the prosecutor thinks that there's as of that moment insufficient evidence, but that does not mean that the case cannot proceed. Okay, the case will proceed. Okay, so for rape cases, the police officers has 36 hours um, to bring them to file a complaint with the prosecutor. Okay, so just summon medical legal. So avoid brushing, bathing, etc. Air dry the DNA samples. Um, use and then of course present evidence on use of drug, alcohol, etc. Get the clothing for deaf survivors, videotape it. Okay, and then of course use hearing and deaf relay interpreters if needed. Okay, when of course use them whenever needed. Okay, so and then for the DNA samples, they should be brought for analysis, not just collected. Okay. And of course, even when the medical legal exam says no evident injury, that only means that there's no evident injury, but it does not exclude sexual abuse, meaning to say there could be sexual abuse except that there was no lacerations. Okay. Okay. So here's what I mentioned about post-exposure prophylaxis within 3 days test. If negative, test for HIV. If negative, take post-exposure prophylaxis for 28 days. Emergency contraceptive pills within 5 days, IUD within 7 days, Hep B vaccine. And then for those who induce abortion, they can avail of post-abortion care that's legal. Now, of course, repeat HIV test on the third 6 months, etc. Always check for psychological state because some may become suicidal. Do a pap smear within a year, of course. Um, you, the provider can also use visual inspection with acetic acid, okay, and cryotherapy if needed. Okay. Okay. So, and then of course the medical certificates are also important, whether to treat STI, RTI, or for STI, gonorrhea, chlamydia, etc. Okay. So the HPV 16 and 17 are the ones that cause cervical lesions. That's why the pap smear is important because you can see if there are lesions. Um, are there rape survivors who have lesions as a result of the rape at some point? Yes, it would develop years later. So that's why the pap smear would be important, right? And this would be to prevent cervical cancer and have some rape survivors become I have at the end cervical cancer? Yes. So that's why we should be able to use this as standards. Okay. So toxicology report for drugs, alcohol, psychological, psychiatric report, psychological report, for example, for the mental disability, for those who are mentally challenged. And then, of course, DNA analysis collection from the body, from the cigarette, the towel, the crime scene, etc. Okay. And then pregnancy test, etc. Um, and then for those uh, who are do not have birth certificates, do a dental exam, of course. And then there are some cases when the bruises would appear days later. Okay, so that's why please ask them to come back if ever there are no bruises that would show, but it appears 4 days later. And please take note that there are some hospitals saying that they can only do the medical exam within 24 hours. That's crazy. Okay, so because we know that some of the abuses, the bruises would appear only after 48 hours, after 3 days, right? So these medical legal exams should be conducted, okay? Or even a corroborative one. An initial one can be made, a subsequent one can be made once the bruises appear, okay? So the complaints, of course, rape, anti-sexual harassment, depending on the circumstances, safe spaces, also coercion, threats, illegal detention, um, anti-trafficking, depending on the circumstances, voyeurism, etc., cybercrime, etc. Okay, so for the government officials, of course, with the ombudsman, for police, with the pleb, with the IAS, with the NAPOCOM, with the armed forces, with the provost marshal. Okay, apart from the criminal cases. Okay, so the Quezon City Protection Center. I know there's someone from the QC Protection Center. Hello. So we established this in 2011. We also created an ordinance for this. So it's open as of now, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. You can email us. You can Facebook Messenger us. We have police officer, social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist, medical legal available. Okay, and a lawyer, myself would be available upon request, and usually every week. Okay, so we also have now in Quezon City a shelter, the Bahay Kanlungan. Okay, okay. And what I'd like to mention about the QC Protection Center is that we have a lot of clients, and it's high compared to many others, other protection centers, because we go around the cities, the city QC, and in everywhere I go, I talk about it whenever it's a related topic. And of course, the staff are all well known in their fields as well. Okay. Okay, so dial 911 for emergency assistance. It works actually, okay? So Island Police, they answer, okay? CIDG, Women and Children Protection Division, Cybercrime, NBI Cybercrime, NBI VAUSI, the CIDG, Island Police, NBI VAUSI, they can do the entrapments should it be needed, okay? Okay. So for PLDT, do you know that they have blocked pornographic sites already? Um, and then sign language, there are some of them here now. You can contact them. And then for government, we know that there's, as of now, the old law has not been amended. So 10 pesos for medical treatment, etc. For violent crimes, CHR, you can also go to them for police, for financial assistance. Okay. So here is just to show that for children in conflict with law, I already mentioned that above 12 to 15, they would be in a rape case, they would be placed in a Bahay Pag-asa. Okay. So, and this is just to show that in sexual abuse cases, physical abuse of children, whether or not it's sexual or serious physical, or even if it's not life-threatening, the barangay, the DSWD, the law enforcement can rescue. And the one in green highlight also shows that after long advocacy, it's now in the protocol of the DOJ that the barangay, the law enforcement can rescue even without the social worker. Of course, if it's done in the evening, then it's on Saturday or Sunday, or if it would take time, then of course anyone can rescue, especially the ones who are trained, barangay and law enforcement agency. Okay, so we need a strong movement. That's why we're doing this now. More trainings, sexuality education, empowerment, compliance with laws, changes in laws, strengthen investigation of the prosecutors, right? Because the what should be happening is that they should not just be investigating as sort of like judges, but they should go to the ground to investigate and bolster the evidence. Okay, so we should establish more DNA laboratories, not just for the PNP DNA laboratory, which is just one in Krame for the whole of the Philippines. The same with NBI, which is just one for the whole of the Philippines. That should not be the case. Okay. So other laws that we should be trying to amend would be of course, the anti-rape law, raising the age of sexual consent to 16, divorce, ensure adolescent access to contraceptives and child marriage, decriminalization of abortion, pass laws on SOGI, comprehensive anti-discrimination, gender recognition, marriage equality, repeal of sexual infidelity laws, because in a lot of the cases that I've seen, I've handled, it's actually the male batterers, the husbands who have battered their wives, who left their wives for a new partner. And when the estranged wife now has a new partner, the abusive husbands are the ones filing the adultery cases. So it's part of the whole abuse. Okay, so and it's good that the PCW has now been taking on this as a part of their priority bills. Okay, so I discussed in haste some of my slides at the end, but these are available in the Gen Rights website. What you should know when assisting rape survivors, what you should know when assisting violence survivors, the paralegal manuals, the videos. You can email us, and then the protocol on to address domestic and family violence. It's up on our web as well. And then the change.org, decriminalize abortion. It's on change.org. It's also on the decriminalize abortion ph that ph website, plus the decriminalization of abortion bill, among others. So thank you very much. That is all.
Wow. Maraming salamat po, Attorney Claire, at napaka-rich at napaka-comprehensive po nung ating discussion today. So, for the Q&A po, so meron po bang gustong magtanong? Mag-live questions po? So, you can raise your hands din po. Meron po ba? Parang wala akong nakikitang gustong mag-live question. So, siguro basahin ko na lang po yung question po. So, yung kanina pong question po, what if, galing po siya kay John Nino, what if public schools include in their school, college, university, code or student handbook manual provisions that prohibit LGBTQ students to wear school uniform based on their SOGI, lesbian students to wear pants, or gay male students to wear skirt? How do we respond to counter this based on existing law daw po?
Well, if it's in Quezon City, you can file a case for violation of the QC Gender Fair Ordinance, and I was one of those who co-drafted that ordinance. If it's not in QC, you can also, of course, try to file complaints using the Magna Carta. You can go to the Commission on Human Rights on this. You can go to PCW on this. You can raise this also with whether it's with the deathbed or whether it's in the private schools. They have associations on this. You can also try the CHED if it's a university. You can also, of course, file for damages if any damage already has been done. In one of the cases I mentioned, they already filed a child abuse case. So these are some of the cases that can be filed to challenge, and basically also, even a test case can be filed. It can be with a regional trial court case, also using constitutional provisions as well, or even with the Supreme Court. depending on how the Supreme Court would rule, sometimes they are strict on injury, sometimes they're not. So, but these test cases can be done, um, basically to plus of course there's also the um, you have this child protection guidelines, right? And this can be used in any of the cases that I mentioned, or any of the administrative cases, or any of the letters that I raised earlier, because there are child protection guidelines which already recognize the right to, it's still limited then because it's an old guideline. It only mentions about sexual orientation. Uh, Gender identity wasn't mentioned then, but it's the same thing. You can use that, the child protection guidelines. Okay? So these are some, and then we can tackle the rest of the questions.
Opo. Yung baka po nadaanan na rin po 'to, pero for the benefit din po siguro nung iba, ang tanong po ni Attorney Lorraine po, rape as HRB, hindi po ba siya isang attack upon one's honor and reputation?
Um, uh, we it's not. We are veering away from the attack on honor, and reputation, right? Because as I've said, I was also part of the advocacy, and many other uh, activists, feminists, were part of the whole process in amending the anti-rape law way back in the 1990s. Um, and, and, and one good win was uh, reclassifying rape as a crime against person, right? So when we say crime against person, um, regardless of one's past so-called honor, right? We are saying that she was violated, regardless of whether whatever she was wearing, regardless of whether she was engaged in transactional sex, etc. So that's why we're saying a crime against person, any kind of course, it's a, as I said, it's a crime of violence. It's a it's a uh, an act of torture, right? Um, and basically, we're saying it's a form of gender-based violence that should not be happening and that should be eliminated.
Opo. Tas meron pa po, is there a situation where a rapist is acquitted po from Miss Leia Liabres?
Okay. And that's what I mentioned earlier. I cited several actual cases. One is Karen Bertido's case. Um, it Her case was after 8 years of prosecution. Um, it The perpetrator was acquitted after 8 years. In the case of Nicole, for those who are uh, older, might remember the case of Nicole. She was raped by Lance Corporal Smith. Um, she won in the RTC case. Unfortunately, when it was appealed, um, uh, the perpetrator was acquitted by the three women Court of Appeals justices. Okay, and these are just a few. Okay, unfortunately, there are many, and we know this. Even in Quezon City, they they are dismissed by the prosecutor at the preliminary investigation. They may take long before the prosecutor will issue the resolution, um, and that should not be the case. And we know of dismissal, so that's why we need to do all of this. Um, we need to conduct trainings with even the prosecutors, the judges as well, and very early on. That's why I'm saying that I helped out in the drafting of the RH bill. Um, Unfortunately, the comprehensive sexuality education is not fully implemented and effectively implemented. And that could help in terms of discussing how women should be given credence, women should be believed, right? Whenever they file complaints, and that there should be no victim blaming, but rather it's only the perpetrator who should be blamed for such violent acts.
Tas, from Miss Carla po, how about daw po sa rape survivors na gustong mag-file ng case pero 10 years ago na yung incident? So, pwede pa po ba yun?
Okay, yes. If you download our resources, the What You Should Know in Assisting Rape Survivors at engenderrights.com, you would see there the prescription, that the prescription is up to 20 years. Okay, so meaning to say, even if it happened 10 years ago, even if it happened 19 years ago and 11 months and 29 days, you could still file a case. But I'm hoping also that even the prescription period would be extended. If you watch a lot of movies, you will know that in other countries, their prescription period is really long, sometimes even 25, 30, 35 years. And that should be the case. Okay? Because otherwise, the perpetrator would be out there, and the perpetrator can commit other rapes and even rape slaves, and even and anyone can be a victim. It can be your daughter, can be your sister, your mother, etc. So that's why we want our society to be a safe place to live in. That's why all of these would be part of ending the rape culture, even strengthening the laws, amending the laws.
Tapos, from She, should the medical practitioners, doctors or nurses be capacitated in detecting patients who are possible victims of rape or sexual abuse but cannot speak about it? What are the possible remedies and mechanisms on this po?
Okay. For you mentioned medical legal doctors, right? So, well, the job of a medical legal doctor is to conduct the medical legal exam, one, right? But it's inherent in their job as well to refer for proper counseling, um, be it a counselor through um, um, a social worker, for example, but also including psychologists and psychiatrists. Okay, so to me, the more people the survivor is able to talk to, the better. Why? Because the medical legal might be able to say something. The social worker might be able to say something that might be very useful. The same with for the complainant. The same with the psychologist. Uh, Sometimes it's an or psychiatrist, or sometimes it's even a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and even the lawyer, for example. So that's why at the Quezon City Protection Center, sometimes I would ask, or oftentimes I would ask, um, that the complainant speak with not just the social worker, but also with our expert who used to be a GAD desk officer in a certain barangay, to myself also, to the psychologist also, and to also get a psychiatrist uh, who will come out with a report on the trauma, and who will appear in court and testify to uh, uh, provide the expert testimony as regards the trauma.
So, ito po yung isa pa po, second to the last po siguro to, from Attorney Piay, is there an existing guidelines where rape women avail of aborting the child as a result of rape?
Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, we do not have a guideline for rape survivors to be able to access to safe abortion. So that's why there's a move, and I drafted a bill to decriminalize abortion. precisely because I have had clients, I have assisted clients uh, who became pregnant as a result of the rape. And that's when I started questioning the issue of lack of access to safe abortion. Um, so that's why um, we also know that there are uh, um, um, you have, for example, Father Bernas, the late Father Bernas, and I always quote him, uh, who is a priest, Catholic priest, Roman Catholic priest, but who also says that abortion should be allowed to save the life of the woman. Okay. To me, there are other people also. For example, my professor in medical legal ethics, who actually placed in his book that for rape survivors, we should really allow rape. We should really allow abortion, for example. So that's why these kinds of commentaries can be used as a guideline. For example, even with CHR, you can come out with a um, whatever it is that you might want to come out with, um, an advisory, for example, to come out for the uh, DOJ to come out with such a guideline, or for the health department to come out with such a guideline. Do you know that even with the uh, emergency contraceptive, it's in the family planning guidelines, but a lot of medical providers are not aware of that still. And I was in a meeting last year in February of 2020, and the doctors were saying, some of them were from POGS, some of them were saying, oh, but that's an old guideline, etc., etc. So even access to emergency contraceptive has become a problem, is a problem for, and has become a problem for the longest time, even with existing um, clinical manuals. So if the health department can come out with an AO on that, that would be helpful. The same with the DOJ, and the same an advisory with the CHR, that would be very helpful. Because do you know that, just to mention, the Philippine government in 2019 actually came out with a state party report saying that um, Article 11 of the revised penal code can be used for therapeutic abortion if it's to save the life of a woman, uh, uh, and basically saying that this is to avert any kind of uh, other further abuses, right? So that's how the Article 11 is framed in terms of exemption from criminal liability. So the Philippine government has come out with that before the United Nations. Okay.
Ayan po. Tapos po, from Miss Iris po, do we have programs, interventions for rape victims regarding treatment of trauma po?
Okay, so in terms of trauma, you have centers. For example, one is the Quezon City Protection Center. You have the child protection units, right? And there's already an AO uh, where you have the women and children protection units, where every hospital, whether private or public, should have a WCPU, actually. So it should be implemented. It should be followed by all hospitals, whether public or private. So all of these WCPUs, or protection centers, should be able to provide um, counseling for trauma. Plus, we have an old law already, because we have the twin laws, right? RA 8353 on the anti-rape law, RA 8505 on the Rape Victim Assistance Act. And basically, the 8505 um, provides for establishment of a rape crisis center in every province and city. But let's ask the ILG how many provinces and cities have been implementing this, right? So, unfortunately, very few still. Okay, so we also have the DSWD, where they have the havens, right? And sometimes I speak as a guest speaker in some of their trainings. And they have shelters in several parts of the Philippines. And they are able to access counseling. But what my appeal is that um, the counseling should be widespread, because um, not too many psychologists, psychiatrists actually handle these cases. So we need more psychologists, psychiatrists. We need more social workers. We need even higher pay for them, not just for the PNP and the army, right? We need higher pay, and even for the same with healthcare providers. Okay, so and their contracts should always provide for um, requiring them to appear in court. Okay, because some of them do not want to appear in court, um, and sometimes they are circumventing the whole issue because they do not have a contract that says so. Okay, so all contracts should have that as well. Okay, so but I'm saying that there are still limited access. Do you know that there was a time when even with the child protection units, um, a child survivor of rape or even physical abuse would wait for 3 months. There was a time that they would wait 3 months, and perhaps even until now, just to wait for a psychologist to be able to speak to a psychologist or psychiatrist. So that's the problem. Okay, and I'd also like to point out that um, the after services is very important, right? For example, some groups are very active with children in conflict with the law, right? But try to think about the services provided for rape survivors, and for even for battered women, okay, trafficked women, okay, um, and you would see that there's lack of support, financial training, etc., um, even livelihood training, etc., shelter, etc. We need more of these. You would see if you try to compare. Um, Perhaps we should do a comparison of how many children in conflict with the law centers are there compared to rape crisis centers, because all of these are all important, and all of these should be attended to, right?
So, ma'am, last three na lang po, Attorney Claire, na question.
Dami mo ng question.
Dami po kasing last na. Ito po. In your opinion po, isn't aborting the baby of a rape victim another form of human rights violation?
Okay. I will not discuss this at length kasi I already discussed this unless you are coming in only now. So here what I'm saying is that we respect whatever position any person might have on this, but I will always defer to the decision of the woman, as I've said, if she wants to terminate the pregnancy as a result of the rape, whether it's because she was a battered woman and she needs to undergo a safe abortion. And that kind of an abortion is actually a therapeutic abortion because it's already an incomplete abortion, for example, or intrauterine fetal death. And these are all what you call should be accessible for post-abortion care. Okay, so these are all legal already. And do you know that miscarriages are also called spontaneous abortions? Okay, so spontaneous abortions are naturally occurring conditions. So abortion is not necessarily, for some people or for us advocates, it's not a terrible word because it can save the life of a woman suffering from a miscarriage for a health provision that should be provided. Unfortunately, because of the stigma of the law, stigma of certain groups, for example, who would impose beliefs on others, even women, poor, especially poor women, suffering from miscarriages, which just happened to them, for example, after carrying a heavy merchandise, they would suffer a miscarriage, and when they rush to the hospital, they are forced to admit that they drank something by public hospitals. And when this is a natural condition, okay? So this is the kind of stigma that is happening when we do not talk about even spontaneous abortion, even incomplete abortion, which is a natural condition, even intrauterine fetal death, And I know even of a wife of a lawyer who was refused access to therapeutic abortion when the fetus already died. And she could die. And that's how harsh the law, the interpretation of the law of son, which is, of course, as I've said, legal for all these naturally occurring, even intrauterine fetal death, incomplete abortion, spontaneous abortion, and of course, for therapeutic abortion, which could be for rape survivors, for suicidal people. Um, we are not forcing anyone who do not want to induce an abortion. That's your right, of course. But for women who need this, who would otherwise die from an unsafe abortion, who would die from suicide because of a forced pregnancy from a rape, who would die because she is forced to carry the pregnancy to term, as in the case of, for example, the woman with the dwarfism condition. I asked the mother, if your daughter knew of access to safe abortion or emergency contraception, would you have used it, for example? And she said, if we knew of emergency contraception, then perhaps she would not have become pregnant as a result of the rape. But people do not talk about emergency contraception. Doctors do not know about it. Folks, people are questioning even the guidelines, etc. Not all, of course, but some. So we have a problem, right, of preventing pregnancy resulting from rape. And now you have people, and this mother said, if my daughter had access to safe abortion, then my daughter would have been alive. Okay. So I spoke to the woman, to the mother, and I even wrote a poem on this because I simply cannot take the law that we have now that is so harsh. Okay.
Okay po. Sige po. Last two na lang po.
Thank
How
you.
are affidavits of denial, recantation, and desistance given credence in rape cases po?
Okay, I will cite one example. In the case of Nicole, okay, it should not be the standard in law and its jurisprudence and in practice is that recantations should not be given that much weight as the complaint affidavit, unless, of course, there was force during the um, drafting of the complaint affidavit. But otherwise, if there's no force, threat, intimidation, etc., the weight should be on the complaint, right? So it's not on the recantation, okay? So in the case of Nicole, it was not even an actual recantation, okay? So it was misinterpreted as a recantation, and all of the rest of the circumstances were misinterpreted. Imagine the case of Nicole. This is what happened. Okay, she was accosted she was drinking in the bar with a friend. In fact, I think even her sister. I forget now. But anyway, she was drinking. Um, she was accosted out by the U.S. service personnel. Okay, she was, of course, drunk then. She had too many to drink at that time. She was raped inside the van, and there were other men there who did not intervene in the rape. After the rape, she was thrown out. The next morning, she was thrown out of the van without her clothes on. Is that consensual? Obviously not. Okay, but the court failed. The Court of Appeals justices failed to see that clearly. What kind of a person would do that, right? Obviously, there's lack of respect, lack of consent, okay? So, also, there is now a standard in 7610, RA 7610 in anti-trafficking, that for any desistance, the case would continue, right? So, but this is not being done for rape cases, but this should be the practice as well, right? So that's why we should amend the anti-rape law, and also, even without the amendment, make it a practice that even with a desistance, the case should pursue. Of course, the evidence would be, you would have less evidence in such a case, right? But the case should still pursue, right?
Ayun po.
Last
Nandito
two
po,
more.
Last na lang po. Si Sir Tito po ba nandito pa? Ang haba po kasi ng question niya.
Wala lang. Kanina nandito siya.
Oo, wala na po ata siya.
Ayan, Sir Tito. Nakita ko na
Baka
siya.
pwedeng i-question, ipaano na lang po. Kung ano po talaga yung question na gusto nyong itanong.
Nakamute po kayo, Sir Tito.
Try, baka i-unmute mo ata. Attorney Tuay.
Summary na lang ng question.
Sige. Basically, Karen, check mo yung question.
Hello,
Ayan
attorney.
na.
Po kayo, Sir Tito.
Tapos na po. Okay na po. Marinig niyo ba ako?
Yes po.
Hello?
Sige po. Hello. Sige po. Go ahead po. Ano po yung question niyo?
Hello, attorney.
Hello, yes. Please proceed. We can hear you.
Marinig niyo ba ako?
Yes po.
Hi, thank.
Hello. Sige po. Go ahead po.
Okay, thank you. Magandang hapon po, Attorney Padilla. In your recommendation, you mentioned strengthen speak. Okay, thank you. Parang delayed yung ano ko
Sige po.
Sige, okay lang. Kasi may feedback ka, may feedback. Pero sige, diretso lang.
Hello. You mentioned in your recommendation to strengthen prosecutors' investigation. As a general observation, prosecutors are dependent on the affidavit submitted to their office, except for celebrated cases where the DOJ would create a panel of prosecutors to investigate a specific crime. My question is, how can we or how can you strengthen the prosecutors' system? And I hope this kind of session would also be given to judges, prosecutors, and lawyers, because if they don't appreciate the pieces of evidence based on your lecture, the case would be dismissed. Because I have a case regarding 9262, the court dismissed the case because the accused manifested in his affidavit his intent to support. At that becomes the basis of the judge to dismiss the case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Okay, first I'd like to cite that the city of Valenzuela, they have prosecutors who are already doing intensive investigation. So they go to the ground and gather evidence. So that's one. Okay. Second, there are pending bills in Congress on this, strengthening the investigation powers and their mandate to investigate and the mandate to investigate by the prosecutor. So we should support these bills. However, as you mentioned, we know the legislative process can take a lot of time. So trainings can also help discussions. We've also done trainings in the past, but I have been involved in a lot of projects as well. In other projects as well. So we need intensive trainings for prosecutors, judges, even justices, because we all know that even with existing training, it's not even a one-shot deal training can reverse a lifetime or historical discrimination against women, lifetime or historical sexism, patriarchy, gender-based violence, and even sexism, if I haven't mentioned that earlier. So what I'm saying is that even with, as you mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned it about 9262, we've had problems with the financial aspect because some lawyers would tend to interpret the financial provision very strictly when it should be, when there are actually two provisions, if you notice the law. on financial abuses, there's one. Clearly, if there's a failure or inadequate support, there's already a violation. And the other is if it's being used as a form of psychological harassment, right? So any kind of lack or inadequate abuse, financial support would be in violation of the two provisions. But a promise to provide support is only after the fact, which means that the violation was already there. And perhaps if I take a look at the case, um, if the woman already filed for financial support violation, and it reached the court, that only means that there's been ongoing violation, meaning she has not been getting the support. And the promise to support would not be sufficient. And that's why I think she was forced really to file the criminal complaint in that case. So that's why, as you mentioned, trainings would be very, very important. And as I've said, even trainings, but a change of mindset, of course, would be very important. And um, receptiveness and compassion and a clear understanding of women's rights and the impact of the violation would be very important.
Attorney Claire, last na lang po from the deaf community po. So, Cresta, you can ask your question. Is Cresta here?
Okay, so if we have two interpreters, one would do the sign language, the other
Yes,
would
po.
have to do the
Interpreting.
oral
Yes.
interpretation.
Where is J?
She can also type
Yes.
or
Jay is asking for to be unmute. Sir.
ayan.
Yes, Sir Jay.
So magandang hapon po. Marami po sa community po ng kababaihan, lalo na po sa mga bingi po. Kunyari po ang anak po nila ay bingi nga po. Nangyayari po kasi pagka na-rape po yung anak po nila, lalo na po ito pagkababaihan po. Ang problema po ay wala po silang access pagdating po sa interpreting po, lalo na po pagka ang magulang po ay walang pera po. So minsan po hindi na po nagkakaintindihan po. Hindi na po nabibigyan po ng pagkakataon na mapatuloy pa po yung kaso po. Kaya ang nangyayari na lang po doon, ang nangyayari po doon yung suffering din po sa mga magulang kasi yung sabi natin po na yung accessibility para sa kanilang komunikasyon ay nagkakaroon po ng problema. Paano po a-access din daw po yung mga magulang po. Lalo na ang tagal po ng pagkuha ng mga interpreters. O minsan po yung pagpo-prosecute po ng kanilang kaso po ay tumatagal pa po ng mahabang panahon. Kasi ang pagkuha po ng interpreters ay wala po. Kasi ang isa rin po doon daw ay minsan po yung responsibility daw po ay nasa magulang binibigay na maghanap ng interpreter. Tapos minsan po nga po daw dahil din po sa mentality ng mga ibang relatives na po na may kapansan na anak mo. So parang ang tingin na po nila ay napabaliwala na rin po yan. So paano natin, ang tanong po ni Cresta, paano natin po matutulungan po yung mga ganito pong kaso po?
Okay.
Kasi
So,
natatandaan niyo po yan, may mga ganyan po mga kaso po talaga.
okay. Thank you, Cresta. Thank you, Jay. Nakailang session na tayo, Jay, no? Okay, to si ibang mga deaf din. Salamat ulit. Nandito kayo. Yung the only way talaga ay ma-organize yung mga deaf, ma-organize natin yung mga parents, relatives, di ba? Na alam nila kung saan makaka-avail ng mga hearing sign language interpreter. At usually pag mahaba yung session ko, may discussion doon ako sa deaf relay interpreter, di ba? So yung deaf relay kasi, may mga experience kami kayo sa Quezon City Protection Center na kapag deaf and schooled, meaning hindi marunong mag-sign language interpretation, kahit na magdala tayo ng hearing sign language interpreter, mahihirapan pa din. So kailangan ng deaf relay interpreter, di ba? Para magkaintindihan. Kasi parang Latin yan eh. Hindi maintindihan diretso ng hearing sign language interpreter kung walang deaf relay interpreter. Tapos ang ginawa din namin, nag-play acting kami. So ako kasi naman may background sa theater. So gumawa kami ng parang kunyari, ito yung bahay, ito yung comfort, ito yung bedroom, ito yung kitchen, ito yung sofa, ito yung sala, etc. etc. Nakakatulong din yon. So, tapos hindi lang yung syempre yung deaf, pero lahat ng sa barangay, lahat ng kapulisan, prosecutor, judges, di ba? Dapat alam din na meron na tayong napasa, di ba, na batas dyan, yung Philippine Sign Language, at saka yung support, di ba, na sinasabi na magkaroon ng interpreter, di ba? So, ang issue nga lang talaga, kahit ako, yung mga cases ko, sorry, nag-allergy ako, yung mga cases ko na meron akong deaf clients, nahirapan ako talaga kasi kahit na merong konting ability, for example, to pay for hearing sign language interpreter, pagdating sa korte, binubuo pa lang namin yung storya ng complaint. Kailangan namin ng libre na sign language interpreter. Kasi, so kaibigan na lang, kaibigan ito, kadalasan, yung ganyan, na willing tumulong. Yung ganon. So, ang lumalabas, di ba, in fact, sa city, sinubukan namin, sa Quezon City, sinubukan namin as a consultant, yung ibang mga staff, na magbayad kaya tayo ng services ng hearing sign language interpreter para kung may kaso, easily accessible. Yan. Tapos yung ilang staff din, for example, ng QC Protection Center, nag-undergo ng training on sign language interpreting. Pero kasi talent siya eh, di ba? So, for example ako, mahina talaga ako sa sign language. Never ko na, hindi ko alam yung mga letters na sign language, yung ganon. So it's really a talent that we should be able to encourage more people to study sign language interpreting. So kahit nga yung families, sabi ng mga advocates, hindi rin sapat na ang kukunin mo ay yung kapatid or yung anak or yung nanay to interpret in court. Dapat talaga, in fact, nag-devise pa nga, di ba sila Dr. Liza Martinez, ng assessment, di ba? Na paano ka mag-assess na anong klaseng sign language interpretation ang kailangan niya, anong klaseng level ng skills yung kailangan. At so very important itong mga to, di ba? So alam ko napakahirap, pero kailangan ng mahabang panahon, mahabang advokasya, maraming letter writing, maraming meetings, whether Zoom man ito or at some point pag nag-ease na yung restrictions, di ba? Personal meetings, para maging available. Yung kaso na binanggit ko na RPB case, umabot sa korte, wala siyang hearing sign language interpreter. So kaya hindi siya maintindihan. Kaya natalo yung kaso, di ba? Kaya ang sinasabi natin, mabuti ngayon meron tayong provision for sign language interpreting. Dapat nga lahat parati tayo ng merong provision for sign language interpreting, di ba? Kasi nga para accessible siya. At alam ko marami sa kanila minsan volunteer yung services at syempre mahirap naman na parating volunteer, dapat din compensated sila. So gusto ko lang sabihin ay kailangan ng mahabang panahon na naglalabi tayo. Kung ang tawag ko nga dyan ay eat, sleep, drink, persons with disability advocacy, eat, drink, sleep talaga yan. Persons with disability rights, deaf women's rights, deaf people's rights, ganun talaga siya. So, at kailangan natin ng mas maraming tulong. At sa gender-based violence, unfortunately, kahit sa korte, in fact, sa court, kahit yung judge, sasabihin ko, pag sinabing deaf and dumb, sasabihin ko, Your Honor, they prefer to be called deaf, ganyan. So, sinasabi ko yun sa korte, ganun na yung ginagawa ko para lang maintindihan na. Tapos kapag sila Dr. Liza, pag may problema kami sa sign language interpreting, siya mismo susulat yung ganun para magkaroon ng interpreter. So kailangan natin ng mas maraming Dr. Liza, yung ganun klase, mas maraming Jay, yung ganun, mas maraming mga interpreters, mas maraming kayo na mga deaf rights advocates, mga persons with disability rights advocates, to join us, di ba? Kasi pati yung mga SPED teachers, di ba? Kaya very important. It's really, kumbaga, mahabang trabaho, pero dapat nandun tayo para sa long haul, yung mahabaan talaga ng trabaho. Kaya rin, very important na yung youth, very important na mabuti accessible ito sa FB, di ba? So more people can view and more people will know that we have a lot of problems that we are faced with, di ba? And we need assistance and support from a lot of people.
Salamat po, Attorney Claire. So, ino-close na namin yung Q&A. So, bago po tayong matapos, tinatawagan ko po si Attorney Twyla Rubin. Attorney Twy. Nag-screen share pa si Attorney Twy.
Hello. Thank you. Maraming salamat, Attorney Claire, sa pagpapaunlak sa aming imbitasyon. Thank you po talaga. And on behalf of the Center for Gender Equality, Women's Human Rights at saka Commission on Human Rights, igagrant po namin ang aming Certificate of Appreciation and of course yung aming pasasalamat sa iyong pagpayag to be our resource speaker during the lecture on Ending Rape Culture held via Zoom on March 18, 2021. Ito po ay sign ng aming Commissioner si Com Karen Gomez Dumpit. And gusto din po naming malaman niyo po na currently sa Zoom room 84 tayo, nag-start po tayo ng 100. First time po ng center na magkaroon ng isang webinar na nasagad yung aming account. And in fact, kanina may na ano pa noon na hindi makapasok because ang dami-dami pong gustong manood at dumalo sa session na ito. Kaya maraming salamat po kay Attorney Claire. Palakpakan po natin siya, pakita natin yung ating appreciation through a heart, through a thumbs up sign para sa ating speaker. And if you look din po, Attorney Claire, sa Facebook, umabot na rin tayo ng 1,000 na engagement doon. So talagang marami. And marami din yung shares ng session na ito. Nagpapakita na talagang napaka-importante at napakamaraming taong interesado na mapakinggan ang session na Ending Rape Culture. At sana tama nga yung sabi niyo, marami pa na session na ganito at mas marami pa yung mapapakinig. Kaya talagang nagpapasalamat kami sa iyo at sa pagpapa-unlock na imbitasyon. Hindi lang for our regional offices na nandito, no, aming gender umbud focals, lawyers, investigators, central office staff, nandito din po mga God focal namin. But also, nandito din po yung ating very strong women with disabilities and advocates persons with disabilities na nandito sa Zoom room at also nakikinig or nag-tune in sa Facebook. So thank you. And I think, Karen, no, magpapapicture tayo with our
Yes
guest
po.
speaker.
Pwede, hihilingin po sana namin paki-open po yung camera nyo. So, para ma-start natin yung pag-picture.
Yan si Doc. Bestseller po ang inyong
Apo.
webinar.
Sige po,
Claire.
pa-open po ng ng cameras po. So, sige. Start ako sa first page siya. 1, 2, 3. Another one. Second page. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, sa third page. 1, 2, 3. Wait lang. Yan. So, fourth page na po. Pa-open po ng cam. So, okay po. Mukhang yung iba ay walang camera. Okay. Okay po. Sige, ulit ko na lang yung iba. Okay. Ay, wait lang. 1, 2. Sige po. Sige po, thank you po sa lahat. Okay na po. Yan. So, ipo-post na lang namin. Tsaka yung thank you din dun sa mga sumagot dun sa evaluation. So, na lang po. Ipapadala na lang po namin yung e-certificates nyo. So, Attorney Tway, okay na po tayo.
Sige, para din formal na pagsasarado ng aming programa, maybe may gusto pa bang sabihin si Attorney Claire bago ako magsasarado ng programa for today?
Salamat din sa opportunity. Yun lang po at natutuwa ako. Maraming shares pala. Maraming nanood.
Thank you.
Thank you po. Attorney Tway, nakamute ka.
Ngayon magsasarado na po kami ng programa and as I said, isang malaking magandang learning session yung tanghaling ito. Nagsimula sa isang overview din ni Doc Basas at saka ni Com Karen kung gaano ka-importante na i-address ang rape culture at paano to kailangan natin may ma-tackle as women's human rights advocate, bilang gender umbud, bilang mga advocates and persons with disability and human rights. At sa lecture ni Attorney Claire, narinig natin ang iba't abang aspeto no, mura sa legal, yung mandato, ano yung basihan nito, ano yung pinag-uugatan nito, ano yung manifestation nito. Sobrang extensive ng discussion, kasama na yung paano ito trinatato ng courts, ano yung evidence, even in fact yung mga usually hindi natin naririnig sa mga rape lectures or lectures on rape, no, or sexual violence. Madalas nandun lang sa what are the provisions of law, what are the remedies. Ito extensive kasi pati yung ano yung mga health services na dapat in place at dapat pag-uusapan kung ikaw ay biktima ng rape at paano dapat ito tinutugunan ng gobyerno. And I think these are important discussions that we should continue. And I think I agree din, Attorney Claire, na kailangan yata mas marami pa sa justice sector na ganito, no, na mga discussion, yung na-mention kanina sa prosecutors, more sa lawyers, lalo na it will really affect women's access to justice. So thank you once again. Thank you to our sign language interpreters, kay Jay, at kay Amy, and to our deaf community, to our speakers, Karen, ang pasimuno nito, at saka si Leia and all the other members ng GEWHRC. Maraming salamat. At sa aming gender with focals and sa regional offices and central office na nag-tune in. Thank you po sa inyong lahat and happy Women's Month. Muli, Attorney Claire, maraming salamat po sa pagpapa-unlock na imbitasyon at sa lecture na napakapuno-puno.
Thank you po.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye po.
Congratulations, Karen. End ko na yung
Sige po. Thank
streaming.
you.
Although may mga questions pa sa sa FB. We'll try to
Sa
answer.
FB.
Yeah, yung mga nasagot natin dito sa Zoom room. Ganun po ka blockbuster yung ating questions and
Sige po.
lecture. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye po. Thank you.